There's a question that American military personnel, Pentagon analysts, and strategists around the world are quietly asking, but that no one has yet answered clearly enough. If the United States sends ground troops to Iran, can it win this war? At first glance, the answer seems obvious. Most people assume that, yes, the greatest military power on the planet would crush any adversary in the Middle East. The United States has the largest defense budget in the world. They have cutting-edge technology. They have aircraft carriers, stealth fighters, precision missiles. They have NATO and strategic allies spread across the globe. But the history of modern warfare is replete with examples of powerful countries emerging from smaller conflicts deeply wounded, financially, politically, and in terms of their international reputation. Vietnam, Afghanistan, Iraq. Each of these conflicts left deep marks on American society. Thousands of dead soldiers, trillions of dollars spent, entire regions destabilized for decades. And most revealing, no clear victory. And now, in March 2026, this issue has returned to the center of the global strategic debate with an urgency few expected to see so soon. Because the United States and Israel bombed Iran, nuclear facilities were attacked, military bases were destroyed, the Iranian leadership was directly targeted by precision operations. The world woke up to a war that seemed unlikely and is now real. But here's the point this video will explore in depth. What if aerial bombardments are not enough? What if the stated goals, destroying Iran's nuclear program, forcing regime change, ensuring Israel's security, require something that no American president wants to announce publicly? What if it is necessary to send soldiers to Iranian soil? Because that's exactly what this video is about. Not about whether the US has the military strength to invade Iran. No one questions that. The real question is another. Could the US win this war even with ground troops? Or were they entering a strategic trap that would be impossible to get out of? In the next few minutes, we will explain what really happened in the crisis between the USA, Israel, and Iran, show the historical and strategic context that most news ignores, analyze the real interests of each actor involved, and build the most likely scenarios for the coming years. Stay until the end, because the answer will surprise you. To understand what's at stake, we need to start at the beginning, not with today's news, but with the logic that led the world to this point. Wars between great powers rarely begin with land invasions. They start with something called climbing. Climbing works like a ladder. Each step increases the intensity of the conflict. Governments do not jump directly to the most extreme option. They climb step by step, responding to pressure, reacting to events, trying to maintain control of the situation. The first step in modern conflicts is leadership targeting, the so-called decapitation strikes. The idea is simple. Eliminate the decision makers, and the system collapses. The enemy loses the ability to coordinate its response. In the case of Iran, this was the first move. And here appears the first big problem for the United States. Iran does not function like most traditional states. Decades of strategic planning have created a system where power is distributed across multiple institutions and parallel networks. Military command is decentralized. Decision-making is fragmented across different organizations: the Guardians of the Revolution, the Allied militias, the regional intelligence networks. This means something crucial. If you eliminate a leader, the system continues to work. If you eliminate several leaders, the system still works. The structure was designed to survive leadership losses. When the decapitation strike fails to end the war, countries move up to the second rung: attacks on military infrastructure, air bases, missile silos, radar systems, naval installations. The objective is to weaken the enemy's ability to fight. The United States has a huge advantage here. American air power is unparalleled in the world. Precision weapons allow you to attack targets thousands of kilometers away with impressive accuracy. But Iran has also prepared for exactly this scenario. Many Iranian military assets are distributed throughout the territory. Facilities are reinforced. Critical infrastructure was placed underground. Missile launch systems are mobile. Command networks are redundant. This is part of a broader doctrine known as asymmetric warfare, the strategy of fighting a stronger adversary without trying to match its strength directly. Think about drones. Iran produces large quantities of relatively simple and cheap drones. These systems cost a fraction of the American defensive weaponry needed to stop them. When dozens or hundreds of drones appear simultaneously, they create an extraordinarily difficult problem. Each interception costs much more than the projectile that was destroyed. An American anti-missile system interceptor could cost millions of dollars. The Iranian drone he shoots down may have cost a few thousand. Multiply that by hundreds of attacks, and the financial asymmetry becomes devastating. This is the central tenet of Iranian strategy. Make the cost of defeating Iran too high. And that brings us back to the central question. Air power alone rarely ends wars. It can destroy infrastructure. It can weaken military capabilities. But controlling territory is another matter. Territory is controlled by soldiers on the ground. This has been demonstrated repeatedly in modern conflicts. Airstrikes can degrade enemy capabilities, but they cannot occupy cities, secure borders, or impose political changes. If the United States' strategic objective were simply to punish Iran or weaken its military, air power might be sufficient. But if the goal is regime change, the removal of the Iranian government, the situation changes completely. Regime change almost always requires control of territory, and controlling territory requires ground forces. Furthermore, there is another factor that rarely appears in the news: Iran's ability to geographically expand the conflict. Instead of allowing the war to remain limited to Iranian territory, Iran can create simultaneous crises in multiple countries. This divides the attention and resources of adversaries. Bahrain is a concrete strategic example. Small in size, but strategically vital, Bahrain has deep ties with Saudi Arabia. If internal instability escalates in Bahrain, Riyadh is forced to divide its attention between containing that crisis and monitoring the conflict with Iran. Every Saudi resource involved in Bahrain is one less resource available for direct confrontation with Tehran. This is the essence of asymmetric warfare. Instead of confronting the stronger power directly, you create situations where the adversary's allies become embroiled in their own crises. And as this unfolds, a third factor enters the picture: global energy infrastructure. Saudi Arabia has some of the most strategic oil production facilities in the world. In 2019, a drone attack on these facilities temporarily removed a significant portion of Saudi production from the global market. Prices reacted immediately. In a large-scale war scenario, similar, or even larger, attacks could cause a global energy shock. Oil prices would skyrocket. Transportation, manufacturing, and electrical energy costs would increase across multiple continents. For the United States, this economic dimension creates a domestic political dilemma. Wars are not just fought on battlefields. They are also fought in public opinion polls, elections, and financial markets. When war begins to affect the price of gasoline and the cost of living for Americans, public support begins to erode, and with it, the political capacity to sustain the war effort. But before we get to future scenarios, we need to understand how this rivalry got here. To do this, we need to go to history. To understand why a war between the United States and Iran would be so different from any previous American conflict in the Middle East, one must understand the historical depth of this rivalry. It all starts in 1979. The Iranian Islamic Revolution was not just a change of government. It was a civilizational break with the West. Shah Reza Pahlavi, an American ally, was overthrown. In its place, a theocratic regime led by Ayatollah Khomeini was installed, which made the United States, called the Great Satan, the central ideological enemy of its power project. The American hostage crisis, 1979 to 1981, in which 52 American diplomats were kidnapped for 444 days, forever poisoned the bilateral relationship. Since then, the US and Iran have not maintained formal diplomatic relations. During the 1980s, the US supported Saddam Hussein's Iraq in the war against Iran, a devastating conflict that left more than 500,000 dead on the Iranian side. This experience profoundly shaped Iranian military doctrine. The strategic conclusion that Iran drew from that war was clear: never again to face a superior adversary in the open field, in conventional combat. Instead, develop asymmetric capabilities that make any invasion extremely costly. This learning has guided decades of Iranian military investment. Development of the ballistic program, today the largest arsenal of medium-range missiles in the Middle East. Creation and financing of allied militias, Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthis in Yemen, Shiite groups in Iraq and Syria, the so-called axis of resistance. Nuclear program, whose strategic ambiguity is, in itself, a powerful form of deterrence. Meanwhile, the United States has experienced its own historical lessons in the Middle East. The 1991 Gulf War was a quick and decisive, but limited, victory. George H.W. Bush chose not to advance to Baghdad, aware of the risks of a prolonged occupation. The 2003 invasion of Iraq under George W. Bush was different. Saddam's regime was toppled within weeks, but what followed was chaos that cost 4,400 American lives, more than 100,000 Iraqi civilian deaths, and an estimated $2 trillion. Afghanistan repeated the pattern, and in an even more revealing way. 20 years of occupation, $2.3 trillion spent, more than 2,400 American soldiers dead. And the end result? The Taliban returned to power in August 2021, in practically the same position as they were before 2001. These numbers matter because they reveal a repeating pattern. Countries with superior air power, advanced technology, and abundant resources still encounter dramatic limits when they must control territory in complex societies with deep histories of national resistance. Now compare these wars with Iran. Iraq has 438,000 square kilometers of territory. Iran is 1.6 million square kilometers, almost 4 times larger. The population of Iraq in 2003 was about 25 million. Iran has 88 million inhabitants. Saddam's Iraq was a state with centralized power, easily decapitated. Iran has a distributed system designed specifically to resist this strategy. And there is an additional factor that rarely appears in superficial analyses: the geopolitics of energy routes. The Strait of Hormuz, located between Iran and the Arabian Peninsula, is the transit point for approximately 20% of all oil consumed in the world. In any war scenario, Iran has the ability to block or attack this route, with immediate consequences for global energy prices. And then there is the factor of Iranian national unity, an element that Western planners consistently underestimate. Iran is a diverse country with multiple ethnic groups and different political perspectives. Under normal circumstances, these differences sometimes produce internal tensions, but external threats often change the political atmosphere dramatically. When a country believes it is under attack by foreign powers, internal disagreements quickly become secondary. This effect has been observed repeatedly in history. External pressure can strengthen governments that would otherwise face internal criticism. Each foreign missile attack can be presented as evidence that Iran is resisting powerful enemies, generating strong feelings of national pride and resistance. And Iranian history goes far beyond the 1979 revolution. Iran, historically known as Persia, has maintained its cultural identity and resisted invasions for more than 2,500 years. Greeks, Mongols, Arabs, Russians, and British all tried to subjugate this territory. None succeeded permanently. This historical context is not mere romanticism. It is strategic data. Any military planner who ignores the depth of Iranian national identity is making the same mistake that American planners made in Iraq and Afghanistan. There is still one last historical factor that needs to be mentioned: the nuclear issue. Countries that have nuclear weapons are extremely difficult to invade. North Korea is the best-known example. Despite decades of tension with the US, no invasion has occurred. Countries that abandoned their nuclear programs, on the other hand, faced very different outcomes. These lessons are not lost on Iranian leaders. If at some point in the conflict Iran concludes that the regime's survival is at stake, the incentive to demonstrate a nuclear capability becomes immense. And that would be the moment when all military logic would completely transform. No international conflict has just one narrative. Each actor involved interprets the same events in completely different ways and acts based on objectives that are rarely stated transparently. Declared strategic objective: destroy Iran's nuclear program, protect Israel, ensure regional stability. Real strategic objective: maintain American hegemony in the Middle East, guarantee the free flow of oil through the Strait of Hormuz, and demonstrate that American power is still capable of shaping geopolitical outcomes after 2 decades of inconclusive wars. Possible gains: if airstrikes can effectively destroy Iran's nuclear program and weaken the axis of resistance, Without requiring a ground invasion, the U.S. consolidates its regional position at a relatively controlled cost. Risks involved. If the air campaign fails to produce decisive results, domestic political pressure in the U.S. grows rapidly. The American population has very low tolerance for new protracted wars. And here's the central pitfall. If the bombings don't work, what's Plan B? The language used by the American government is carefully constructed to avoid the term invasion. There is talk of precise military operations and threat neutralization. But strategic logic points to a real dilemma. If regime change is the goal, air warfare is rarely sufficient on its own. Declared, eliminate the existential threat posed by Iran's nuclear program. Real strategic objective, permanently destroy Iran's ability to finance and arm Hezbollah, Hamas, and other groups that threaten Israeli territory. Ensure that no state in the region possesses nuclear weapons. Possible gains. The elimination of Iranian nuclear capabilities and the weakening of the axis of resistance would represent a historic transformation in Israel's security environment. Without Iranian funding, Hezbollah weakens significantly. Risks involved. A prolonged war could provoke Iranian retaliation on a scale not yet seen, with ballistic missiles on Israeli territory and the activation of Hezbollah in Lebanon. Israel is a geographically small country, extremely vulnerable to a prolonged conflict of attrition. There is also an important diplomatic dimension. Israel depends on American support. But the more the conflict escalates, the greater the risk that the political cost for the U.S. will become unbearable, especially if European allies and countries in the global south condemn the operation in forums like the UN. Declared strategic objective, defend national sovereignty, resist American imperialism. Real strategic objective, survive as a regime. Ensure that any attempted ground invasion is turned into a strategic nightmare for the U.S. Use the crisis to strengthen internal cohesion and consolidate popular support for the government. Possible gains. Even under heavy bombardment, Iran can achieve a strategic victory if it can turn the conflict into a protracted war of attrition. Every month of war without an American victory is, for the Iranian regime, a demonstration of resistance. Each escalation the regime survives increases its narrative legitimacy internally. Risks involved. The destruction of industrial and nuclear infrastructure represents a technological setback of decades. The death of military leaders can create internal instability, and in a scenario of complete defeat, the regime could collapse. The Iranian strategy has three fundamental pillars. First, geographic expansion of the conflict, not allowing the war to be limited to Iranian territory. Activate Hezbollah in Lebanon, support the Houthis in Yemen, encourage instability in Bahrain and Iraq. This divides the attention and resources of adversaries. Second, threat to global energy infrastructure. Any attack on Persian Gulf oil facilities turns a regional conflict into a global economic crisis. This creates political pressure in the US, Europe, and Asia, and forces governments to question the cost of supporting the war. Third, ambiguous nuclear deterrence. Without formally declaring that it possesses nuclear weapons, Iran keeps the possibility open. This ambiguity is, in itself, a powerful form of deterrence that forces any military planner to include the worst-case scenario in their calculations. No analysis of this conflict is complete without mentioning two actors who are not on the front lines, but who are watching with deep strategic interest. Russia sees the US-Iran conflict as an opportunity to divert American attention and resources from Ukraine and Europe. Any weakening of American strategic concentration in Eastern Europe directly benefits Moscow. Furthermore, any disruption in the global oil market tends to benefit major energy exporters, and Russia is one of them. China is watching even more closely. Beijing relies heavily on Middle Eastern oil. Any instability in energy routes represents a direct economic risk. At the same time, China is interested in demonstrating that there is an alternative to American leadership and supports Iran diplomatically in forums such as BRICS and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. In a protracted conflict, both Russia and China benefit from American attrition without having to fire a single shot. With all these factors in mind, let's construct the most strategically relevant scenario. What happens if the US decides to send ground troops to Iran? Imagine that, after months of bombings, the Iranian regime is still standing. Nuclear facilities were damaged, but not completely destroyed. The guardians of the revolution continue to operate. Iranian allied militias across the Middle East have intensified attacks on American bases in Iraq, Syria, and the Persian Gulf. Political pressure in Washington grows. The president faces a choice: back down and accept an ambiguous outcome, or take the next step, sending in ground troops. The decision is made. American soldiers advance onto Iranian soil. What happens next? Phase 1. The first few weeks, American technological power completely dominates the initial environment. Stealth planes control the airspace. Special forces eliminate strategic positions. American television broadcasts images of columns of armored vehicles advancing. It seems, once again, a quick victory. Phase 2. The scenario changes. Iranian forces retreat into the Zagros Mountains, into dense urban areas, into networks of underground tunnels built over decades. Urban combat begins. Every city becomes a labyrinth. Every block, a political and military minefield. The guardians of the revolution, trained specifically for urban guerrilla warfare and asymmetric warfare, turn every street into a trap. At the same time, Hezbollah, with tens of thousands of missiles aimed at Israel, begins an offensive in northern Israel. The Houthis in Yemen attack shipping lanes in the Red Sea. Iraqi militias attack American bases in Iraq and Syria. The war that was supposed to be in Iran is now in 4 countries simultaneously. Phase 3. The economic factor. Iran and its allies attack oil facilities in the Gulf and attempt to blockade the Strait of Hormuz. Oil prices soar globally. The cost of living for Americans increases significantly. Inflation returns. The economy slows down. What was a matter of national security now directly affects the daily lives of every American family. Phase 4. The nuclear factor. At some point in this escalation, Iran makes an announcement that paralyzes the world, declares, or convincingly demonstrates, that it has operational nuclear capability. At that moment, everything changes. As the reference text for this analysis accurately explains, countries that possess nuclear weapons are extremely difficult to invade. North Korea, despite decades of tension with the US, has not been invaded. The simple fact of possessing or convincing the world that one possesses this capability completely transforms military calculations. Any American commander would have to answer a question for which there is no comfortable answer. Is it worth continuing the ground invasion if there is a real risk of nuclear escalation? Even if the likelihood of nuclear use is small, the consequences would be so immense that any rational decision-maker would hesitate. Phase 5. The American domestic political dimension. In parallel to all this, domestic politics in the US collapses in support. American casualties begin to mount. Images of dead soldiers reach American screens. The political opposition demands a way out. Polls show dramatic drop in support for the war. We are facing a pattern that the United States has seen before. Vietnam, Korea, Iraq, Afghanistan. In all of these cases, American military power was sufficient to win battles, but insufficient to win wars. The difference is that battles are won with tanks and planes. Wars are won with clear political objectives, sustained public support, and an exit strategy. In the case of Iran, none of these 3 elements are present. The most likely outcome of this scenario, after months or years of attritional conflict, with rising casualties, rising economic costs, widespread regional instability, and unsustainable domestic political pressure, the U.S. finds itself in a familiar position, needing to negotiate a way out that can be presented domestically as success, but which, in practice, has not achieved its declared objectives. Iran, even though militarily devastated, survived. The regime, weakened but still standing, emerges from the war with a narrative of resistance that strengthens its internal and regional legitimacy, and that will inspire anti-American movements for decades. Global consequences of this scenario. China takes advantage of the American distraction to consolidate its agenda in the Indo-Pacific and accelerate its influence in Africa and Latin America. Russia consolidates positions in Eastern Europe. The BRICS gains membership and strengthens itself as an alternative to the US-led order. The dollar as a global reserve currency is questioned more intensely than at any point since 1945. And the Middle East, once again, is left with the scars of a war that promised stability and delivered decades of instability. We have reached the end of this analysis. And if there is one lesson that the history of geopolitics teaches us with brutal persistence, it is this: wars are easy to start and almost impossible to end in the time and way their initiators planned. The conflict between the United States, Israel, and Iran is not a new story. It is the latest chapter in a decades-long rivalry, built on layers of history, ideology, strategic interests, and accumulated miscalculations. What we analyze in this video clearly shows why a ground invasion of Iran would pose a strategic risk of a completely different magnitude than any war the US has fought in recent decades. Iran is 4 times larger than Iraq. Its power system is decentralized and designed to survive decapitation attacks. Its military doctrine is asymmetric, built to make any invasion extremely costly. Its ability to expand the conflict regionally is real and proven. Its potential impact on global energy markets could transform a regional conflict into a global economic crisis. And the nuclear issue remains the most unpredictable and dangerous variable on the entire board. Many political decisions are only understood years, sometimes decades, after they are made. The 2003 invasion of Iraq was supported by the majority of Americans at first. The withdrawal from Afghanistan in 2021 was considered humiliating. What seemed obvious one moment turned out to be wrong the next. Geopolitics is rarely about isolated events. It's about long-term strategic processes, where each decision produces consequences that unfold for years and shape the world that the next generations will inherit. As the document that underpinned this analysis accurately concludes, the question of whether the US will send troops to Iran does not depend on a single decision made in a vacuum. It depends on the accumulation of pressures created by the course of the war itself. If airstrikes fail, if regional crises multiply, if economic disruption spreads across multiple continents, and if nuclear deterrence enters the calculation, the field of options available to decision-makers narrows dramatically. And when all other options are exhausted, the last choices start to seem inevitable. The question that remains, and which in the coming months the story will begin to answer, is this: are we facing a passing episode in the history of the Middle East, or the beginning of a reconfiguration of the global balance of power that will define the coming decades? The next few months will reveal a lot. Every decision made in Washington, Tel Aviv, and Tehran will add a new chapter to this story, and we will be here to analyze each of them with the depth that the topic deserves. If this video helped you understand this conflict better, leave a like. It makes a huge difference to the channel's reach. If you want to continue following in-depth geopolitical analyses like this, subscribe and activate the bell. And in the comments, tell us, in your analysis, should the US send ground troops to Iran? Or are the risks too great? See you in the next video.